I just wanted, this is an issue that's really important to me, the Israel and Palestinian conflict, and I kind of wanted to call in and clarify a few things. I called in on Monday with Matt and Michael, so I just wanted to sort of weigh in from my side. I think one of the major problems in not just this conflict, but the one 2 years ago and just ongoing for decades, is that everyone is so reactionary to what happens, and they don't pay attention to what is really important. There's demonstrations, for example, for the Gaza people who are basically the major victims in all this, taking casualties, right? And no one's talking about what's actually happening, how to help those people. Why isn't the international community going in there and helping the Israelis to get rid of Hamas? Why aren't they, offering to fill the void after Hamas is gone to nation build and not create anarchy like there was before Hamas?
Well, no, but I mean, I think, I don't know under what authority, frankly, the UN would have to go in and help Israel get rid of Hamas. I mean, at one point Hamas was elected, was popularly elected. So, I mean, it may be the case that Hamas is not a positive force in this conflict, but I would think it's also arguable as to whether or not the Israelis are either, in terms of getting peace. And so I'm not sure I even understand the basis of that assessment.
So let me clarify. Even if the Israelis, right, which I totally take your point. I mean, I'm not a fan of Netanyahu's actions. And I think that there were many prime ministers before him who got much closer to a peace agreement with the boss than he ever did. Having said that, Hamas is really, there will be no peace as long as Hamas is in power.
Look, all I can tell you is a month and a half ago, Hamas had basically capitulated to all of Abbas's demands, had joined the unity government under those auspices, and the Palestinians were prepared to go forward.
Yeah, this whole Palestinian unity thing is a sham, basically. 2 years ago, they attempted a reconciliation in a similar way. Look, if Hamas is really part of this unity government, and this unity government has negotiated a ceasefire with Israel, brokered by Egypt, why isn't Hamas honoring what they're supposedly part of the government?
Wait a second. First of all, what truce that was brokered? What truce that was brokered? What are you talking about? The one that Egypt came up with, and that the Israelis accepted a couple of days ago, and then it was supposed to start at at 3 p.m. and prior to that, Israel started bombing again?
Well, Hamas never agreed to that ceasefire, and the reason they don't agree, and they make it very clear, even now, they say they will not agree. I mean, Kerry is now trying to make a ceasefire.
Right, they won't agree until the blockade is removed.
Correct. Right. They want to get rid of the blockade. The blockade, by the way, I just want to clarify, the blockade is done by Egypt and Israel. And the Israeli side is actually more lenient because the Israeli side is actually, since 2010, letting through materials and all kinds of things, except those things that can be used to make rockets. The
and
Egypt
food.
Side only lets through people and not any supplies.
Food and medicine.
Right. Humanitarian stuff for sure, civilian stuff for sure, but not things that can be used to make rockets. What I'm trying to say is no one is talking about putting our country's boots on the ground in that region, which is a small region. It's not like Iraq. We have borders where
George, I don't understand. Okay, I don't understand. Greg, I'm not following here what you're suggesting. You're suggesting that the UN and the international community should go in and take out Hamas, whatever that means.
In a nutshell, I'm saying in a nutshell that they stop at blaming Israel. It's easy to blame Israel and do nothing. They do nothing. Our countries do absolutely nothing to help the Gaza people. They could help. It's a small piece of land.
We could help by putting in funds. We could help by saying no blockade.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
We could help by saying no blockade. We could help by saying no blockade. We could help by pouring funds into to Gaza. We could also help by saying to Israel, hey, you know what? You know that whole thing about the settlements, which you were supposed to, you agreed explicitly to stop increasing them in the West Bank? That destabilizes any attempts of moderates within the Palestinian people. We're going to tie our funding to you to actually holding to, what was it, the 2009 agreement? I mean, look, Israel has agreed to stop settlements, and Israel has never done it. That's a fact.
In the West Bank, I agree with you. But
yes, but it doesn't matter. You can't listen. It begins to undercut the authority of moderates because they make a deal, and then Israel doesn't seem to subject themselves to any of the terms.
When you say Israel, by the way, there's a whole Israeli left, which you never talk about on the show.
Well, I understand. I mean, of course I talk about the Israeli left. But you want to look at the polling right now in Israel? You know who the next? Well, you know who's the odds-on favorite right now to maybe be the next leader of Israel?
Listen, I agree with you. It's turned to the right. But what I'm trying to say is, if you care about the Gaza people, the people that are actually being killed, okay, our countries only stop at calling on Israel to lift the blockade. They don't even call on Egypt to lift the blockade.
You know what? If you really want the number one way to protect Gazan civilians right now would be for the Israelis to stop firing missiles upon them. There is...
Okay, and then what happens after that for the next year? How does the rule of Hamas help the Gazans exactly?
Well,
Hamas kills them.
That's a separate question, isn't it? That's a separate question. The way that you disempower Hamas was exactly what was done 2.5 months ago, which was an extended period of truce. Now, you're going to have to get back to that place, but Israel's not interested in getting to that place. They have proven
you understand, during this truce, Hamas was building tunnels in order to invade Israel.
You know what?
Tunnels,
listen,
right?
If you want to stop Hamas from invading Israel, then you bring Israeli soldiers down to that border and you station them there. And yes, it may cause more Israeli casualties, but if you want to stop killing, if you want Palestinian civilians to stop dying, there is one thing you can do in the short term to actually make that happen. That is, stop firing missiles into Gaza.
Okay, and continue to receive rockets, hundreds of rockets a day.
We know that those rockets are ineffective because of Iron Dome. So much so that Mayor Bloomberg was there on TV saying, it's perfectly safe here.
Okay, so listen, I have just one question for you.
Yeah.
Okay, my question is, do you realize how much Hamas has hurt the Gaza people?
Yes.
Forget Israel.
Yes.
Forget Israel.
Yes.
Take Israel out of the equation.
Yes.
Okay,
yes, I do. Now, do you realize that this attack by Israel has strengthened Hamas? Do you realize that? Do you realize that Hamas today is more powerful? Hamas today is more powerful than they were 5 weeks ago. Do you realize that?
They're more powerful today.
Yes, they are more powerful today than they were 5 weeks ago. There is not one analyst that you can read or you can read. There is not one analyst who would disagree with that statement.
The European Union is currently, in an unprecedented move, is calling for the removal of Hamas, or at least the disarmament of Hamas.
Amongst the Palestinian people, Hamas is far more powerful. Their political situation has improved dramatically because of this. That is indisputable.
ISIS is powerful. Does that mean we're supposed to let them do whatever they want?
Well, you know what?
They're killing the Gazans.
No, they're not killing the Gazans. The Israelis are killing the Gazans.
Listen to me. Here's a fact. Before the Israelis ever put up the blockade, okay, here's a fact. When Hamas was democratically elected into the Palestinian Legislative Council, it immediately said it will not honor any previous agreements after 1-year truce. It will not recognize Israel. And it will not renounce violence.
You're completely missing my point.
Right.
Okay, what you're arguing is, I'm saying to you that when I take this pen and I drop it, it lands on the floor. And you're saying, but that pen is bad. And I'm saying, I understand. I'm not a fan of Hamas.
That's not what
I'm not
saying.
supporting
That's
Hamas.
not what I'm
I am
saying.
simply saying there is a physics to this. And it is not subject to your opinion of whether or not Hamas is a good force or a bad force.
Okay, just assume,
the reality
just
is
stops firing
this has empowered Hamas. That's just the reality.
Let's assume. Fine. But let's assume that Israel does what you say it will do. The Gaza people will still live under the rule of Hamas. Can I just say one?
Let me tell you
thing?
something.
When
3
Hamas,
months ago, they were looking like they would not be.
Yeah, it always looks like that.
All right.
Hamas
Well,
has
okay.
disarmed everyone
All right.
in Gaza.
All right.
They have a monopoly on the
All right,
arms
George.
in Gaza. Who is going to vote them out? Who? How will they get voted out?
Are you aware that a month and a half ago they did a unity accord, and they had basically agreed to every term that Abbas had offered? I mean, I keep asking you this question. You seem to ignore the reality of it. So I don't know. You tell me, George. What should we be doing? Should we send down troops? Should we keep bombing Palestinians? What should we do?
The international community.
Okay, the international community should do what? We should invade Gaza?
Should help liberate Gaza.
Okay, how would we do that? Give me the specifics. Give me the specifics. Israel is dropping 1,500 missiles on them.
The same exact way that we did it in Iraq for worse reasons.
Oh, okay.
And in Iraq,
I see.
yes,
All right.
in Iraq,
That's an interesting. Okay. All right. So you're saying that what we should do is the same thing we did in Iraq.
Well, let me just say one thing. In the 80s, we went into the Gulf War, and this is, Michael, this is where I think you misunderstood on Monday when I said we withdrew. I meant we widrew in the 80s when we defeated the Republican Guard.
Talking about 1991.
You're talking about the 1991, but we didn't go into Baghdad.
Right.
I mean, you're talking about invading, shock and awe. Okay, we started with shock and awe, if I remember correctly, with Baghdad, and you're talking about dropping off these type of ordinances. Where will the Palestinian people go? I mean, how many civilians do you anticipate we should kill? That will be killed there.
I'm not saying we should kill them.
No, but they're going to die. There's no doubt about it. By definition, they're going to die. I mean, we know that 70% of the.
They're going to die either way, unfortunately.
Okay. Well,
no
I mean,
the
you know what, George? I just don't think I'm not in a position to advocate that much civilian death. I mean, we know at this point that 70% of the deaths that have taken place in Gaza have been civilians. So you're willing to say, like, you know what? For the good of the Palestinian people, I'm going to advocate for the deaths of tens of thousands of them?
No.
How many?
What I'm saying
5,000?
is much more peaceful. Well,
no, George. There is no.
I'm saying that for the last.
All right, I got to jump, George. We've talked about this.
Hamas had a peaceful way to help. Okay, next time I'll tell you. Hamas could have just renounced violence, and the other countries would have.
That's right.
Actually
That's right. And Bibi
But they
Netanyahu
never do it
could have
because
just said no settlements, and I love the Palestinians, and we're all going to be friends. But none of that is happening. So we are left with the reality,
let me just
George.
ask one final question before. Can I just ask one final question on this call? Okay. My question is, after the Israeli army completely withdrew to the 1967 borders, the Gaza people have that land. They have the borders. All they have to do is not fire rockets, and all they have to do is basically work with the international community. That's it. Why can't they do that? Because Hamas is in power, and because Hamas.
That's not a question,
needs to be
George.
the go-to.
All right, I'm going to say goodbye. That's not a question. That was a statement. And it doesn't matter if what your statement is accurate. It doesn't matter. Because I'm talking about the reality now. And yes, if we go back to 1945, and the British did not control that area, and did not determine that they're going to give up part of that land to the Jews. And if the Jews had not kicked out the Palestinians in certain areas, and if we go prior to that, if there was no Holocaust, and if we go prior to that, if there was no World War I, and if we go prior to that, yes, all of those things may be the case. But the reality is there was a reality on the ground 2 months ago. And the reality is we cannot wave a wand and make Hamas better. And the other reality is that those teenagers were probably kidnapped by a group that was not even based in Gaza, that Hamas could not control. These are fantastical things that are really based upon some type of subjective perception of the moral quality of these actors. And I'll tell you something. When you start to talk about the moral quality of some of these players, I don't think there's any way to get to some type of sustainable peace. I really don't think there is. I mean, the reality is you have hundreds of Palestinian civilians at this point killed. If you want them not to be killed, the first thing you do is stop dropping bombs on them. And yes, I understand. There are rockets being fired at Israel. They have figured out a way to protect themselves. Right? I mean, we know this because there have been 2 civilian deaths, and that was down through the tunnels. And you can put Israeli soldiers down there, and they could fight those incursions. Yes, I understand there is a tendency to say, okay, there is domestic pressure. You've got to go in and punish those Palestinians. I understand that. And maybe it is far-fetched to assume that Israel would not go in or could withstand the domestic pressure. But the reality is, if you want those civilians to stop dying, you have to stop dropping bombs on them. It is that simple.
Well, and just, again, also, he talks about Hamas as this one-dimensional actor, and there has been long stretches of time where Hamas has restrained rocket fire from Gaza. And you talk about if you just want to go in and punish the population of Gaza, that's what's happening. That's what part of this is. That's what do you think they mean when they call operations like this lawn mowing?
That's exactly.
I mean, I don't like it. You got to be really delusional to not see the upshot of what this is. And of course, I mean, as soon as they withdrew, they still had Gaza under blockade and under effective control. So even the notion to say that Gaza was just liberated is ludicrous. There was never autonomy in Gaza, period. And then they elected Hamas, and then they were punished as a result of it. Right. I mean, and they're also like, you talk about the Saddam Hussein analogy and being bad to you. Saddam Hussein probably does have had a body count of like over 1 million of his own people, including gassing Kurds. And our invasion was still tremendously stupid and destructive.
Right.
And a failure.